all, welcome to the Kate Turkington Show. And I was thinking, so often in these podcasts, not mine, but other people, they've got fancy things behind them. They've got books, they've got sort of cozy nooks. I don't have anything, but I want to tell you a quick story, just my walk. I want to tell you a quick story. Many moons ago, I've just thought of it actually, many moons ago I was interviewing quite a famous, serious professor. And you know how very often when you're interviewing somebody, the interview is in a study and there are books behind them and it all looks so sort of important and trustworthy. And this particular prof was sitting there, incredibly solemn, very important. And I'm very observant. I'm a writer, so of course I'm observant. I was reading the books, the titles of the books on the shelf behind him, and they weren't all that difficult to read. And you know what one of them was? 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey. I didn't mention it, needless to say, neither did he. Anyway, apart from that, here I'm in literally plain sight. And I'm going to talk to you today about Tunisia. I'm a travel writer, one of the many hats I wear. Why? Oh, for all kinds of reasons, because it is the most amazing country to go to. You all know where it is, and in case you don't, just to remind you, it's at the very top of Africa. If you're looking at a map, you've got Algeria on one side, you've got Libya on the other, and squeezed in between, little tiny country, is Tunisia. And Algeria and Libya, of course, had minerals and wealth and everything the French wanted, so they became colonies. Tunisia, poor old Tunisia didn't have anything that the French wanted, so it was just a French protectorate. And of course, wherever the French were, maybe they didn't leave that number of doctors and educated locals and whatever, but they left wonderful baguettes and they left wonderful food and a great sense of style. So you arrive at Tunisia really in a kind of wash of light. And the Mediterranean is very, very calm, very, very calm, blue, stretching out in front of you, which is actually a bit of a misnomer to say it's calm. And I'm going to give you a very quick history lesson because many of you will have heard about Hannibal. Do you remember Hannibal? He took his elephants over the Alps. So let me explain. Let's go back a few hundred years BC, before the Common Era. On the African side, where Tunisia is now, you've got Carthage. Carthage was a huge, sophisticated, bustling, seafaring empire. Carthage ruled the waves. Just across the Mediterranean, on the other side, was Rome. Rome ruled the roads. And Carthage is prospering and doing so well, and Rome is starting to get stronger and stronger. And now battles start to ensue. Why? Because whoever controlled the Mediterranean actually controlled the world at that stage. So for hundreds of years, you may have heard about the Punic Wars. I think I studied them at university donkeys years ago. Never quite sure what they were about. But basically, it was Rome and Carthage, Tunisia, fighting to dominate the Mediterranean. And the key point, actually, I'm collapsing history into a few words. Whoever dominated, whoever ruled Sicily, island of Sicily, bottom of the boot of Italy, whoever ruled Sicily really controlled the Mediterranean. So the fighting went on for hundreds of years. Finally, this is 101 Roman and Carthage history. Finally, Rome conquers Sicily. But Hasdrubal was the name of Hannibal's father, very weathered and weather-beaten, clever old general. What did he do? He started building up a Carthaginian empire in Spain, started building it up, started getting troops in, starting to get literally a groundswell of people and military. So now Rome rules the waves and is reasonably confident about it. Hannibal, in a stroke of absolute military genius, took his troops and went by sea, took all his troops, including the kind of SAS of the day with the Libyan horsemen, the Libyan cavalry, the archers. Hannibal took the whole Carthaginian army and sailed across the Mediterranean, not to Rome, as they were expecting, but to Spain. And with his troops, you know the story probably, he went over the Alps with his elephants that all died actually after they just got over the Alps, but that's not really relevant to the story. And he faces Rome, 80,000 Roman troops, about 40 k's from 30 miles from Rome. The Battle of Cannae took place, Cannae, the Battle of Cannae. It is still taught. My late husband was taught it at Sandhurst, the British military school. It's still taught at West Point, the American military school. Why? Because it's considered still one of the greatest military battles of all time for three reasons. One, the element of surprise. Rome is expecting Hannibal to come by sea. What does he do? He comes through Spain over the Alps towards Rome. And you've got to remember there's no communication in those days. No emails, no radio, no wireless, no nothing. So Rome blissfully unaware of what is happening. So that's reason one, was surprise. The second reason why it's still taught and considered one of the greatest military battles ever in military history. Number two was strategy. This is what Hannibal did. He strung his troops. Remember, the Romans always attacked full frontal. Remember, they had their shields over their heads like tortoises. They came full frontal. What Hannibal did, he strung his troops out in a long line with a bulge in the middle, a bulge facing the Roman army. And there he put his weakest troops, which happened to be the Celts and the Spanish, just a relevant fact. So here come the Romans, full frontal, marching in, 80,000 of them. Hannibal allows the bulge to fall back. It's almost like the Zulu horns of the bull, the impi. The bulge falls back. The elite troops of Hannibal, the Libyan horsemen, come around. They take out the Roman cavalry and they encircle them. They cut off 80,000 Roman troops. And that is the second reason, the strategy, the encirclement. And the Roman historian Livy, some years after, wrote of that day that when you tried to breathe the air at Cannae, you were breathing blood, the slaughter and the blood and the dust and the carnage that went on. The Hannibal and his army absolutely wiped out the Roman army. And then the third, the elements of surprise, the encirclement and the strategy, the three things that made that battle so famous. Rome was panicking. People were packing up their belongings, they were fleeing the city. Then Hannibal was only 30 years old. Okay, people didn't live very long in those days, but even so, pretty good for a 30-year-old. What did you know at 30? Not much, or maybe everything. I don't know. Anyway, he absolutely decimated the Roman army, and then he made his big mistake. One of his older generals, very, very respected, experienced general, said, "Hannibal, now let's go and finish Rome off." Hannibal said, "No, my troops are tired. No, whatever the reasons were, it's not quite clear in history." And he went off for the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, just pillaging and going around Italy, conquering little villages, and generally having quite a good time. The Romans do not like to be defeated. They spent that time building up their army and building up their army. And long story short, they eventually sailed across the sea to Carthage, to modern-day Tunisia, and they wiped out the whole of Carthage, wiped it out. And when you go there today, you might see, they know there's so much under the ground, but you only see, if you go to ruins, you'll only see maybe a couple of Phoenician buildings. Why? Because the Romans built on top of everything the Phoenicians had built and obliterated or tried to obliterate a whole culture. And that's one of the reasons to go to Tunisia today. I've traveled the world. I've seen loads and loads of Roman remains and Roman cities. I grew up in Verulam, St Albans in Hertfordshire in England, which was once a huge Roman city, and still when I was little there were tessellated pavements you could actually play on. Now of course they're all fenced off from public, but Tunisia has the most amazing Roman ruins, Roman cities that you could possibly imagine. Gladiator 1, Gladiator 2, the movies, both parts of those films were actually shot in Tunisia. But just before I come to the cities, no, maybe now I'll just stay while I'm with Rome. There's one city called Duca. You go into Duca, and it's built 2,000 feet, I suppose about 1,700 meters above the plain. And you don't see it when you get there. You sort of walk round a hill, and suddenly you're in this Roman theatre. I want you to imagine, you sit in the auditorium, you sit a mere 3,000 people there. The stage is huge. Absolutely right off the Taylor Swift concerts or the Bono concerts or whoever's trying to come back at the moment. The stage is huge. There are great pillars, stone pillars rising up at the back of the stage. The auditorium, banks and banks and banks of seats, and it literally, it takes your breath away. The sheer power and the pomp and the majesty. And then you wander. We spent half a day just wandering through this Roman city of Duga, Dougga. Once a teacher, always a teacher. And there's a forum, and there's marketplaces, there's a brothel, there's temples, it's so easy to imagine how life went on there and how the people who lived there thought the end could never, ever come. And I don't know, some of you, if you studied English literature or poetry at all at school in English, you probably would remember Shelley's poem called Ozymandias, or Ozymandias, some people say, just 14 lines, and it describes this big statue in the desert. And the last lines are, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And of course, the group of friends I were with, now we have an animated discussion that evening, what is actually going to survive of our centuries. very, very little, I think. There's marble everywhere. And only 200 sites have been excavated in Tunisia. Why? Because they can't afford to excavate them. What has been excavated is usually UNESCO or the UN have done it. But as we were in Togo, on that hill, the hill stretched away in front of us. You could hardly see the horizon. And our guide said to us, under all that is the rest of the city. And on another day, we went to El Gem, which is, I can't remember if it's the second or third biggest amphitheatre outside of Rome. It seats 35,000 people. This is a little inland city. No, it's not on the sea. Nobody quite knows why the Romans built it there, just because they could, I suppose. And this enormous amphitheatre, and for all sorts of reasons, there are hardly any tourists in Tunisia at the moment. When we were in Douga, the city, we were the only people there. Can you imagine if you were in Rome or Verona or anywhere? You'd be wall-to-wall tourists. Sicily, you'd be wall-to-wall tourists. Just the birds singing and the quietness and the calm of these places. And the amphitheatre, they still have concerts in it. For 17 centuries, it's been in use. It actually holds 35,000 people. We went down into the pits where they used to keep the animals, and to my amazement, do you know how they got the animals? You must rewatch the Gladiator films just to marvel at the architecture. How did they get the animals to the floor of the arena? They used lifts, rope and pulley lifts. So you put your tiger, or you put your elephant, or you put whatsoever. Lions were very popular for the Christians too. They would pop animals into the lift, rope and pulley, open the gates, and in they go to the arena, to the roars of the crowd. Just so amazing. I'm sure in summer a lot of French tourists go to Tunisia, and I think a lot of Brits go to Tunisia for the beaches in summer. But if you have any interest at all in history and the history of the world, you've got to go to see the Roman buildings, the cities. Carthage itself is a semi-excavated site, but it's a bit underwhelming after seeing all these Roman cities and the auditorium, because again, very little of it has been excavated, and it's quite hard to believe that it was the principal city of Rome, of the Roman Empire, outside of Rome. But another thing, while we're still talking history, the mosaics, oh my word, the mosaics, you look at some of them, you cannot believe, they're 2,000 years old. The height of the Roman Empire was, the dates aren't exact, so don't go with me, was just before, it was like 100 years BC and 200 years after. So roughly, approximately that 300 years was the height of the Roman Empire. And their pavements and their villas. And there are two wonderful museums. There's the Bardo Museum in Tunisia, I think it's in Tunis itself, which has, there's one pavement, it was actually a floor, but they made a wall of it that goes up about 2 stories of the most beautiful mosaic of maidens and gods and animals and fish and fowl and flowers and Neptune and Medusa and everything you can possibly think of in the most perfect condition. And it's so hard to think that thousands and thousands of feet actually walked over these pavements. It was if you wanted to wonder, you know, we know so much about the wonders of the natural world now, thanks in large to Sir David Attenborough and the BBC and all the natural history, where we don't know so much. I mean, why was Duga built where it was? And this warfare that went on for hundreds of years. And one of our guides said to us, you know, Rome and Carthage, Carthage and Rome, battle, battle, battle. He said to us, you know, it's a bit like America and Russia now. And we actually then, of course, had a big discussion. Was it America and Russia or was it America and China? Anyway, it really puts you in your place as a human. And as I said, what will survive of our, I don't know, how long do computer chips last? Not very long, I don't think. Remember, these towns and buildings were made of stone, solid stone, with marble. There's marble everywhere. You see marble in the souks. The souks are like the little bazaars, the little medieval shopping places. And in fact, the one in Tunis is centuries old and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You go in and there are jewelers and artisans and woodworkers, and in that souk, particularly in the Medina in Tunis, you're not going to find stores selling Chinese stuff. It's all old, artisanal, beautifully made goods that they've been making. I bought a leather puff, you know, a footstool back with me that we've stuffed with newspaper, and we bought mosaics, obviously not the real thing, but we bought mosaics back. And also because the Romans were there, maybe the Phoenicians before them, very good wine, rosé, Tunisian rosé wine. And of course the food, because of its history, because of the Mediterranean diet too, we did not see one overweight person in Tunisia. Think about that, because it's not a consumer society, so there's not much processed food. It's sometimes called the breadbasket of Africa up there, because the soil is so fertile. Olive groves, thousands of years old, fields of poppies, fields of flowers, sheep, tomatoes growing everywhere, citrus. I mean, it's an amazing little country, and perhaps one of the most exciting things we did, and we weren't told about it, so it was a secret. We thought our bus had got lost. We're bumping along over very uneven roads. I mean, the roads aren't great, let me tell you. But our Tunisian guide said to us, the traffic in Tunis, he says it's crazy. You have no idea what it's like. We said, we come from Johannesburg. Are you joking? If you can drive in Johannesburg, you can drive anywhere in the world. So it didn't appear all that very crazy to us. But on this day, so our bus is bumping along. We stop at one little village for coffee, and as I said, the French were there. So it's a village, a very poor little village with one coffee shop. We go in, it's got an espresso machine, do you want a latte? Anyway, and we eventually end up at the very, very northern tip of Africa. It's called Cape Angela. I'm not quite sure why. The absolute northern tip of Africa, it juts out into the sea. And our group came mainly, we had some American, very small group, just 10 of us, came mainly from South Africa. So, of course, we'd done Cape Agulhas in South Africa, in the Cape, which is the southernmost tip of Africa. Now, there we are at the northernmost tip of Africa. And you couldn't see Europe, although it was a beautiful, clear day, the weather's absolutely gorgeous in spring, the shoulder seasons in Tunisia, but Europe is only 140 k's. What would that be, about 100 miles? 140 kilometres across the sea. That's how close Europe and Africa actually are. So if you're thinking of taking a bit of an offbeat trip, I think go to Tunisia. It's really worth doing. And I'm just thinking, as I'm looking at my notes, is there anything I haven't mentioned? I don't think so. Maybe just our hotel in Tunis. You go into the Medina. I told you, this is the old marketplace, centuries old, with some of it's covered, some of it's not. Little winding alleys, beautiful doors, and as I say, UNESCO World Heritage Site. And our hotel had a yellow door, and in the street there are just coloured doors, and you're walking along a little cobbled street and there's a yellow door, and you think, hello, there's a beautiful yellow door. You open it and you are in a palace. This particular, ours was called Dar el Jeld. It had been an Ottoman palace. Remember, Tunisia, like so many countries on the Mediterranean, there have been Phoenicians, there have been Romans, there's been French, there's been Moors, there's Italian refugees, it's a melting pot of every culture. Very, very liberal. The people themselves don't drink alcohol. Well, maybe some do, but alcohol is freely available if you want to have a glass of wine or whatever. Head covering is not, what's the word I want? Not mandatory, shall we say. So, in fact, there were more ladies with bare heads, beautiful, gorgeous, dark hair than wearing headscarves. So there we go. As I say, I've been to many countries. I'm always enthused by the latest I've been to, but this was so special. I don't, I used to be a television director, would you believe, at one stage in my life, but I don't do any of that, don't carry big cameras or anything. So you will have been seeing some of the little photos I took on my cell phone, just to give you some idea. But you know what? Go for yourselves. And as I always say, you yourselves, travel safely, look after yourselves, and look after others too.